With food parcels provided to vulnerable people being shown to contain little more than old stubs of carrots and bits of tat, we ask, who profits from poverty in the pandemic?
Learning from home also means lunch at home for many thousands of families who normally need free school meals. Parents like Amy, a single mum, was told they'd continue through lockdown. But last week, this is the food parcel she received, supposed to feed her daughter for 3 days. But aside from several bags of raisins, it contained very little food.
We did some work, didn't we, with the One Can Trust, and there are many admirable food bank operations whose brief and remit have altered as a result of the pandemic. One of the things I think is worth tagging is that poverty has become associated with shame and how difficult it is to live in conditions of poverty and then have the additional stigmatisation of poverty. For this woman raising her child on her own to be confronted with this dismal smorgasbord of knout when trying to feed a child and educate a child at home, it informs us what we value collectively as a society and the way that we operate systematically when it comes to treating those most in need of aid.
The photo of her parcel was tweeted by the school meals campaigner Marcus Rashford. It prompted many other parents to claim they'd also received inadequate supplies. The government says the hampers ensure children are getting a balanced diet.
The problems we have with the hamper scheme...
You can't call it the hamper scheme with its image of glorious jams and jellies. Oh, look, a pheasant. Ah, it's Christmas. There's a hamper. What's in there? Well, there's this raisin, this carrot stump, and a handwritten note saying F you from Boris Johnson.
Schools are being encouraged to use their existing meals providers, usually private companies.
What this exposes also is what happens when socially necessary services are outsourced to privately funded companies. In the case of feeding Britain's children, the job has been given to a company called Chartwells, a subsidiary of the Compass Group. You might ask, how are these decisions made and how are these contracts issued? And generally speaking, when you watch PR or the kind of propaganda and content that we are fed in substantially greater portions than those families have had actual food, it has to be pointed out, what you're told is that you're dealing with the private sector and the private sector is more expert and more excellent and knows how to handle it and they've got all this experience. But that might be true. But what is also true is that Paul Walsh, chairman of the Compass Group, was a former member of David Cameron's Business Advisory Group, and he is also a Tory party donor. So the person that got the contract does also donate to the Tory party. That might not be the only reason, but those two things are both true. Walsh also sits on the boards of Unilever and McDonald's. So he has primarily capitalist corporate profit-driven interests as the fabric of his life. I suppose even the most rudimentary analysis of this situation shows that we live in a system that prioritises profit over feeding children. It's brilliant, the work that Marcus Rashford has done in highlighting this problem, bringing it to people's attention, and through his campaigning forcing the two governmental U-turns that mean that this topic is still being discussed. Beneath this, though, beneath this problem, is the kind of revelation of how we prioritise the use of resources, what is important to us. And as with the PPE contracts that we talked about earlier this year, it seems that this is another instance where contracts are being awarded to organisations not on the basis that they will do a good job, that they will fulfil that role, that they will ensure that these families and children in particular get the food that they need. I mean, we're talking about food now. We're not talking about Nike trainers, Xboxes, luxury, privilege, joy. You know, what's next? You can't have water. You can't have air. What kind of environment are we creating? It's worth noting too that Compass last year made a profit of £1.4 billion. Perhaps the notion of profit and the notion of feeding children don't belong in the same category.
The problems we have with the hamper scheme is we aren't in control of what goes home. And obviously the companies involved have additional costs. That means not all the £15 can go directly to the children and the food they need.
Not all the £15 could go directly to the children. That £15 has got to go on a long and winding road to the mouth of a child where it's being passed off and portioned off into profit in various forms, evidently. The alternative to food parcels is food vouchers. Another alternative is a society where we prioritise feeding and clothing and taking care of everybody. The kind of difference we're discussing here is systemic change. The constant return to condemnation of individuals doesn't get anything done, like with Marcus Rashford. He's got a house, he's a footballer. Are we going to create a society where we sort of change Marcus Rashford, or are we going to change society altogether so that we acknowledge that there are certain universal principles that we all behold to be true, wherever we fall on the cultural or philosophical or political spectrum? Can we at least agree that children should be fed? Are there certain values that we can make centrifugal to our idea of what a nation is? If we can't settle on these are our values, then how can we have a country either? If we can't at least say, look, in this country, we feed our children, we look after our poor. Otherwise, what is it? What becomes revealed is this country is a group of people who have been corralled into a market, so that market can be subjected to corporate interest at every single level. For affluent people, they can be sold products, tech products, and other luxury goods. And for people that are not affluent, let's call it what it is, for people that are poor, they can still be mobilised and utilised to the ongoing transfer of wealth, the ongoing profiteering that does not abate, even in a time of crisis, that ought to be regarded as a great re-evaluation of the way that we live and treat each other.
The government says parcels like Amy's pictured online was provided by a company called Chartwells, who've apologised, but the experience has left her and many families genuinely worrying about where the next meal's coming from.
The provision of school meals has been beset by problems linked to private contractors, with the administration of vouchers criticised by parents who found that they did not work and were not eligible for enough supermarkets. Other than you can't redeem them and they don't work, they're brilliant. These vouchers can be redeemed at participating supermarkets. However, the official Department of Education's guidance is that schools provide food parcels to eligible free school meal pupils who are at home, citing the significant benefits, while Children's Minister Vicky Ford said that using food parcels rather than vouchers helps keep them in touch with families. A cynical person might say that they're trying to guide people towards accepting the food parcels or hampers or treasure boxes or whatever we're calling them now, because of the relationships they have with the companies that they have granted these tenders to. You see, it seems likely at least that that's something we should consider. Does it seem, when casually observing, that the priority in this system is the service of children, or does it seem like the priority is the service of industry and profit? Compass had previously lobbied the government against vouchers. Well, we've got no real opinion. We did lobby the government a bit against vouchers, claiming they could use their scale to provide cheaper food. That's what they always do. Using our scale, we can provide cheaper food. How cheap? Fucking dirt cheap. In some cases, it's going to be the nib of a carrot. In 2006, Compass announced it had agreed to pay up to $40 million to settle 2 lawsuits brought against it for allegedly bribing a UN official to win contracts worth millions of pounds to supply UN peacekeepers. You know them peacekeepers? Oh yeah, they're keeping the peace. Yeah, they're going to need some food, aren't they? While they're keeping peace, why don't we send them a little box of nubbins and a couple of carrots? A spokesperson for Chartwells, who claimed to be nourishing young bodies. We're here to nourish your young body. What are you going to nourish it with? A little box of scraps. We take our responsibility to provide children with access to nutritious food very seriously. We've worked hard to produce food hampers at incredibly short notice during these challenging times. Our hampers, stop calling them hampers, follow the DOFE specifications and contain a variety of ingredients to support families in providing meals throughout the week. In the majority of instances, we've received positive feedback. Well, it don't look like it from that array of photographs, like a murder scene at a badly run allotment. In October last year, analysis in a New Statesman report found that private companies chosen by the government had doubled the retail value of food parcels containing items that were barely edible. Chartwell's sister company, Chartwells Independent, how independent can it be? Offers luxurious gourmet food for private schools, including a selection of canapes for Norwich School, coconut lemongrass and banana leaf wrapped salmon from New Hall School. Don't remember your impression of school dinners from school? Oh, school dinners! Oh, Jesus Christ, look at this filth! That smell of chips and beans, the constant stink of it, you could almost eat it in the air. You know that famous quote quote, if there were a socialist government, would you abolish first class in the railways? No, we would abolish second class. Couldn't we raise the standard for everybody? Couldn't we have a little bit of justice? What would be required for this to change? What kind of change in mindset? And do you not understand that that's where this has to change? At the level of our individual consciousness, at the level of our cultural conscience. As long as it's acceptable to us that one school's eating canapes and stuff that you've never heard of, and another school is getting boxes of stuff that you'd associate with like Fagan's offcuts to the Artful Dodger, then we're not living in a fair and decent society, and that ain't good for any of us. You don't think that's related to mental health figures down the line, to crime figures down the line, to issues like Brexit, to political fractures, to division, loathing, despondency? We, in a sense, without wanting to sound too hippy-dippy, are one another. There is an ongoing symbiosis. Far from believing in Thatcher's edict that there's no such thing as society, we're a bunch of individuals, there is nothing but society. It's the individual that is the illusion. It is the society that is the reality. This is, to some degree, an evolved mentality that we have inherited, or at least have co-evolved with the United States of America, where this issue is distinct but still prevalent in that America doesn't have the same kind of history of nationalisation that we do, doesn't have the kind of post-war contracts that we have in the United Kingdom. We know the creation of the NHS, the creation of the welfare state. America, of course, has had unbridled capitalism for far longer than we have, even though, of course, in the 1930s there was a sort of a comparable contract, one could argue, under the sort of FDR New Deal. But now, certainly, we are seeing in the United States a different kind of capitalism, and the feeding of children is certainly not exempt from that broad cultural contract. When in 1935 Congress set aside money for school lunch programs, restaurants sued the government for lost business. By 1941, 6 million children were eating food provided by the government. That food came from products farmers had too much of, like pork, dairy and meat. Don't you remember those food group diagrams from when you were a kid? Here are your main food groups: bread, pig meat. We found out subsequently this is just food we can cheaply create and palm you off with. That was never good for us. We were never meant to be eating wheat. Have you ever tried stopping eating wheat? Your farts are as fragrant as sweet cotton candy, I tell thee. In the 1940s, the government passed the National School Lunch Act, funding the programme with public money. While the US took the lead from European countries, there was one thing that made school lunches in the US distinctly American: capitalism. Enter the school lunch lobby. Today, groups like the School Nutrition Association, whose members include companies like Domino's, while corporations like PepsiCo show face at meetings to make sure their products are represented. Like when I was at school, because I'm like, you know what I mean, I'm old now, there was a bit where our school put a Coke machine in the school. And I was like, this is the best day of my fucking life. I loved that Coke machine, or any machine that goes... And what about when they opened a McDonald's? They opened a McDonald's in Grays when I was a kid. That was the best day of my life. I can't imagine anything evoking that kind of enthusiasm in me now. In '66, Congress passed the Child Nutrition Act, expanding the school lunch programme. In '69, 15% of children were getting their lunch for free or a lower price. By 2017, that number had risen to 73%, creating a huge business opportunity for factory-prepared and frozen meals. You see that everything has to pass through the rubric of capitalism. As long as you have that, other priorities will be neglected, because these are competing ideologies. You can't have profit and well-fed, fairly treated children. You have to choose which is your priority. In '81, the Reagan administration wanted to cut $1 billion in school lunch funding. In order to meet nutritional guidelines, the Department of Agriculture got creative and declared ketchup a vegetable. So because it was law that children had to have 5 vegetables in their school lunch, they said, well, they've got to have 5 vegetables. We've told them that now. Could we say, I mean, is this morally reprehensible that ketchup is a vegetable? Oh, what, it's all full of sugar and dye and that. Yeah, but what else is there in there? Tomato, which is some say it's a fruit. It's a vegetable! Today, in some schools, pizza sauces count as vegetables. Don't you think some deep intelligence is talking to us and saying, eat the food that's growing in the place you're in at the time you're in it? Don't fly food all around the world. Don't package everything up in sugar and salt. So many political issues are compounded, concentrated in this issue. The way we prioritise, the way we feed each other, and most importantly of all, the fact that we live in a fundamentalist society that worships profit above all else. Corporate money reaches beyond the lunchroom, reaching school sporting events, parties and summer reading programmes. McDonald's has a McTeachers fundraiser night where teachers come in and work on the counter in the hope kids come in to see them. What kind of desperate dystopia have we created where teachers go to work in McDonald's in the hope that they'll meet one of their pupils? What kind of world is it, really, let's face it, where McDonald's and Coca-Cola and companies of that nature are even allowed to have any relationship at all with schools? It's sort of become beyond parody. parody, hasn't it? There ain't nothing wrong, I suppose, with people turning a buck out of admittedly bloody delicious salty snacks and delicious, gorgeous, sugary drinks. But we can't allow our evolutionary tendency to crave sugar, fat and salt to be partnered with immersive propaganda methods and even the feeding of our children. This is where we need to step back and have some common sense. 15 years ago, 20,000 people were using food banks in the country I'm in right now, England. Now it's close to 2 million. Poverty is increasing, starvation is increasing, but simultaneously profit for some of the richest organisations in the world is increasing. What does that tell you about our values? What does that tell you about where change needs to be focused?